Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. I'm Raven. I will be hosting this event today. And so welcome. The Stoa is a place where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this moment. And today we have Nora Bateson with us, who is a complexity thinker. She's a filmmaker, writer, educator, and her work asks the questions of how we can improve our perception of the complexity we live within. And we're so excited to have you today, Nora, and I'll just hand it over to you.
It's great to be here. Look at all these people. This is so fun. Yeah, it's good to be here, and I have to admit that I am so curious what the unasked questions will be. So I was thinking, what should I do? Anything to prepare for this? And then I was like, but these are the unasked questions. So how can you know? Anyway. So it's great to be here. I'm in Stockholm this evening. This is where I live, just outside Stockholm, and here we are. Good to be here.
Wonderful. So I'll just let you know what we typically do here at the Stoa is we have about like 20 minutes of discussion from our guest, and then we move into a Q&A where I will moderate the Q&A from the guests.
Okay.
And then today we actually have something exciting that I'm offering afterwards for everybody who wants to join, is like a sense-making session. So I'm going to do 30 minutes, and of course, Nora, you can stay if you want to, but you don't have to. So everybody, just to know that after this, you can stay in the Zoom room and we'll actually just have an open dialogue about what, Nora, you brought to the Stoa today. So yeah, that's the deal.
Okay. So I can talk for 15 or 20 minutes about what's on my mind and Okay, great. I mean, like all of us, we've been thinking quite a bit about the pandemic and all the intersystemic processes that are being revealed in their fragility or in their antiquity around this shift and what the virus has revealed. From politics to economy to our relationships with our families to the more ancient clocking of time, which I think has been really interesting. Of what day is it? I heard someone referring to Thursday last week as Blur's Day. That just sort of like, where are we? How many weeks has it been now? And that shifting relationship to time is really very important, because everything runs through that. Certainly your own body and health, but also relationship to work, relationship to food, relationship to your sexuality, all your relationships in your family and your friends and I'm thinking, what time is it that my 91-year-old mother is waking up in Washington State? And when are we going to do our daily Skype call or Zoom call? I'm thinking about when the chickens need to be fed. I'm thinking about when the seedlings are going to sprout. I'm thinking about different modalities of time, and even being in these Zoom sessions, which I know a lot of us are in altogether way too many of right now. Time moves differently in this space. I had the very strange experience of teaching a course that I had never taught before, and it being an online course, and I actually had no idea how to estimate how much time it was going to take to teach this course online, because without all of the relational I mean, I can't feel if your body, I can't feel you understanding me or taking this in. I can't feel your grokking. I can't hear your breath. I can't sense your nervousness. I don't know if you're reading your email or if you're actually with me. And so I started off that course saying, well, I think it's going to be 2 3-hour sessions. But is it okay with everybody if we actually keep that open? Because if we're not done, we may need to do more. Well, it turned out to be 5, because it took that much longer to actually, saturate through the screen. And I mean, right now on your screen, I'm about 1.5 centimeters by 3 centimeters. And if you think about what kind of percentage of the actual me that really is, and just how much information is missing, I often refer to that information as the warm data. So it took a lot longer than it would have if we had been in person. I think that's interesting. What's happening with this relationship to time? And if our relationship to time changes, that changes relationships to everything. And if relationships to everything start changing, you start to get significant change. And the thing about that is that I'm not exactly sure where to go looking for that change, what to call it, how to identify it, where to measure it, how to even register what that change is. Because it seems like it's slipping out of whatever context I go to find it in. So I think to myself, I'm going to pay attention to how my relationship to food and time is changing. And then I start to realize, well, in fact, that relationship is contingent upon, what kind of activity I'm in physically, what's happening with the dog, what's happening with my kids, what's happening in the household, whether or not we've been out to the big shop, who's cooking. There's a lot of cooking going on. So my diet's changed. And then I start to notice that my diet's changed. But it's not necessarily in the places where I would go looking for it, so that I could make a very coherent, explicit, direct list of changes in each one of these parcels of my life. They're leapfrogging around each other. So what exactly is that change? Where exactly is it? I don't know. But I have the feeling that it's something significant. Rhythm is such a core basis of life. And when the rhythm changes, the whole thing changes. So I think that's important. Another thing that is on my mind right now that is connected to this, and I was just tweeting about it today, is this idea of not so much what's emerging, but what's submerging. What's going down right now into that unspoken territory? What is it that I'm starting to bring into my unworded, non-verbal assumptions? What's happening in the meta spaces that are starting to get embodied, that are not voiced? And how are those, what's submerging right now? And I'll give you a little contrast to that, because I've had this really kind of interesting and and I think in a way important, although I'm not sure why, uh, experience of doing these open Zoom sessions on Monday evenings at 6 o'clock, and you're all welcome to come, on education, complexity in intergenerational relationships, and what that looks like in terms of mutual learning between generations around complexity and systems. And I opened this free forum up as a way of just kind of, I don't know, it kind of came out of the periphery. I just sort of thought, well, everyone's home with their kids, and the coronavirus is complex, and we have to talk about complex stuff. So why don't we just open this space up to think about how generations can together explore the complexity and the systemics of this. And this is a personal plight for me because I was a kid who grew up in a household in which it was important to always be looking at the interdependency of life, that was just how it was. We did that. And that was breakfast, and that was the fish tank, and that was a walk in the woods, and that was the reading of a story. So there was no separation ever between this process of inquiry into the complexity of life from the time I was tiny. And so for me, that whole body of beautiful intellectual material was actually just life. It was a way of being. And then I went to school. And when I went to school, I had to learn to break the world into pieces, and that math was something different, and music was something different than literature, was something different than history, and etc. And then I was frustrated by that, and I could feel, as a child, I could just feel the kind of the magic of life just sucking out, and I hated school. So I just sort of thought, okay, let's just do this. I get very frustrated when I hear people saying things like, well, you have to be an adult with this level of development to actually comprehend complexity. And most of the time there's the at least implication that you've achieved some level of academic proficiency to do that. And it just, I find that intolerable, because of course every culture in the world has been dealing with complexity forever at all ages. So I'm not sure, certainly in terms of the jargon, if you want to talk about the mathematics of redundancies and decouplings, and some of the more jargonistic versions of thinking about mapping complexity, for example, in the way that particular epistemology creates that. But bottom line, breakfast is complex. Bottom line, to be in relationship in a family is a complex process. To walk across the room requires an embodiment of complexity. So how do we begin to open that space of mutual learning between generations? So I started this Monday evening thing, and I'll give you the link. And this weird thing happened, because I had actually no idea how radical it was going to be. Because in all the previous iterations of me discussing education in one form or another, I've had to stay tethered to the existing education system in some way, shape, or form. That it was at a conference, or I was working with parents, or there was some reason in which I was having this conversation, and I had to stay in this in this connectivity to existing system. But in this Zoom session, suddenly that was gone. And it was so surprising to me, because I found myself just like actually just talking about my real experience of learning complexity as a little kid and working with my own kids, and how that has really happened, how it really happened, and not in any way looking at it through the lens of the school system, or what the school system could be, or how to adjust the school system, or what a curriculum of systems thinking would look like, or none of that. It was just free of that. So what is submerging? Right? So that was a cue to me that something had actually shifted that I wasn't aware had shifted, that somewhere there had been a moving of the lens, and of even because it was a collective too, it's a group, maybe a little bigger than this group, that were ready to engage with this thing at a level that was unprecedented. Something's happening, and it's I think, after being in the kind of circles of change making for actually just too long, and my family's been working toward bringing change for generations, and I'm just not sure the change is where we're looking. I'm starting to increasingly feel that one of the most important aspects of responding to complexity is recognizing that you can't get at it directly. That thing you want to change is only possible because of the many interdependencies that have produced it. And so if you try to change the thing, you're making an error. And it's a pretty significant error. And this is something that honestly, I'm not sure that I would have said this out loud to a group of people like yourselves that I don't actually know, that have probably devoted your life to change making, right? That there is room for something else to come out now. And I have no idea how to really express where those boundaries have moved, but they moved. So what's submerging? What's going down in there? Why is it suddenly in our conversation right here? What is it that makes it okay to go further than we've been before, to say things, about the difficult ways in which systemic change, in which change in complex systems really takes place, which is it's not going to be on the blackboard. It's not going to be in the YouTube video. It's not going to be on Medium, right? The changes that are really taking place are taking place at a frequency that none of those frequencies can register. And that's us, and it's somehow here, like we're sharing it now on Zoom, but if you were to look at the transcript of this talk, you probably wouldn't find it. Where is it? It's something that's emerging in the relationships, but it's not just my words, it's also your, and the history and the culture, the education system that we had to sit through that sucked the magic out of life. And then maybe put some back in. The changes that are emerging are submerging. So I just wanted to start there because it's difficult and impossible to talk about. So let's talk about it. You wanted unasked questions? Let's go there. So I'd like to open it up now and just see. I think that was 20 minutes, but let's
Yeah.
see. Let's see where it goes.
Perfect. Beautiful. Yeah, so we're opening up to all the questions from people in the room. If you would like to put your unasked question in the chat, and then I will call on you and you can have a little bit of a dialogue with Nora. And until then, Nora, I have some questions. I've been really drawn in by your question that I hear you say. I've heard you say it on Jim Rut's show. I've heard you say it on all of these kind of like, logo-centric kind of like brains who are really interested in systems, and you always come back to this question of who's taking care of the babies? And I think that this question really gets into the kind of, the stickiness, the gooiness, like this interplace of between, which I would say this kind of liminal space that we're in right now is also a kind of between space that maybe it's kind of allowing for the liminal spaces in the mundane lives that we live to come to the fore, since we have this larger liminal space that we're in. But that question to me seems like it goes unasked and unanswered in most places. And I was wondering if you could link those things in terms of intergenerational knowledge and the question, why do you ask that question? And what is asking that question taught you?
Okay, so the place where that question comes from, well, it comes from the basic question of what does continuing mean? What does it mean to continue? And in order to continue, the babies have to be fed. And in order for the babies to be fed, the babies have to be fed in such a way that they could feed their babies. And that the people who are helping to produce all the processes it requires to feed babies can feed their babies. And that their babies can feed babies. So there's a lot of interdependency in that notion of even just the most basic continuance of the human species. And if you are into the Sustainable Development Goals, you could actually just ask one question. How are we going to feed the babies? And it's actually every single one of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals runs through that question. It's a gender question, it's a food question, it's a soil question, it's an ocean question, it's a poverty question, it's education. It's the whole thing is right there. So it shows that in order for there to be continuance, there's going to have to be pretty substantial discontinuance of all the things that are making it prohibitive. I mean, what are the babies being fed, even in the most wealthy households, right? And so taking care of the babies, besides that, I have 6 kids. So as an aside,
Something you've thought about.
Something that I do day in and day out. I have 2 and my husband has 4, so we've got 6, and they're coming from different cultures and all different ages and all kinds of craziness in that. The other thing is that that I grew up in a household, as I was saying before, in which there was an ongoing mutual learning between the generations. So my father, some of you may be aware of his work, but he was one of the people who actually started system sciences, and that's an understatement. But in our household, there was always learning. And that, I mean, it sounds kind of romantic, but the fact is it was just what was. So in some households, you have a kind of currency in the household of who's right, right? In our household, there was a currency of what did you learn? Can you express something that you saw for the first time, or something you perceived that you hadn't perceived before? Or even better, something you thought was one way that turned out to be another. And it doesn't matter what it was, as little as, or as big, as profound, or as banal, it doesn't matter. But just that process of constantly being curious and looking from another direction. And my dad would do this, and he would actually articulate things like, I used to think about it like this, and now I see it's different. Or isn't that interesting that you are pointing that out? I'm going to give that some thought. And sure enough, he'd come back to me a day or two later and say, I've been thinking about what you said, and I've taken it very seriously. And these are the thoughts I have about what you said. What do you think about these thoughts? And this is when I was teeny, 5, 6. So there was not the concern that he could, that I would disrespect him if he were wrong. On the contrary, the idea was more to the point that if he were able to change his mind, he would actually be more trustworthy. Which is, that's pretty significant shift from the way most households work. So that is something that is not him and it's not me. It's something happening in the relationships between generations. And what he's giving to me in that moment is a world in which it's possible to be in that kind of a relationship. All right, it's not even about what we learned or didn't learn. It's about the meta message of what world are you living in. And that's where the really profound piece of that was for me. And so for me, this question of taking care of the babies and feeding the babies is also about, it's about a reveal of what it takes to care about that and what kind of a world that is to grow up in. A world in which the older generations want there to be possibility for there to be more generations is a whole set of meta messages that's so much more important than changing the policy. Right? We can change all the policy of all the SDGs, and we can do all the numbers, and we can make all the graphs. But none of that is anywhere close to shift in the relational thing, in the household, in the family, at breakfast, in the car, on the walk, right? That's where this really happens. So, and it doesn't look like a conversation about how to feed the babies. It looks like a conversation about caring what your kid is thinking about and being willing to change your own mind and being in that same kind of caring curiosity with the creatures in the forest floor. It's a actual learning, listening, but the cliche word is respect. It's so much bigger than respect. It's interdependency. It's being in the interdependence. That's where that feed the babies, take care of the babies thing lives for me, where everything you say or do within that intergenerational relationship has consequences and consequences of consequences of consequences. And so what are we putting down? And the hard thing is that there's been so much damage. There's been so much pain. And it's a curious thing about evolution, where we share our pain. When someone gets hurt, they very often hurt other people because of their hurt, right? So there's an evolutionary question in that about what can we learn that hurt, and how do we move into an interdependent way of looking at it? Where's that hurt? Is that hurt really yours? Or did it come out of the economy? Did it come out of politics? Did it come out of this intersystemic madness that we've been living in for the past several generations? Yeah, so that I just said a whole lot of things in there that we could unpack for a very long time. But nevertheless, I see that there's all this text coming up on the side of my screen, and I haven't read any of it. So give me just a second, unless someone else has been reading it and you want to point it out to me.
Yeah, so what I will do is I'll just filter through all the questions, and I'll call on Ryan here, who's the first question in the chat, and he will just ask his question to you. So you don't have to worry about the
good
chattering that's going on over there.
Lots of little words, yeah.
So Ryan, if you would like to ask your question, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure and honor to be here and getting a chance to talk to one of my role models, Nora Bateson. So my question is basically, I've been in a lot of these kind of like game B systems change circles, and there are different attitudes towards how we should orient ourselves towards politics and to the political. And some people on one side are kind of like, don't bother with it at all. The whole system is screwed. So just focus on your own kind of local decentralized project. And if the system collapses, hopefully that'll be in place to kind of buffer. And other people are more of the attitude of, yeah, but we can't really ignore the political and its implications in impacting the larger system as a kind of interconnected entity. So we should focus on it. So I'm just kind of curious how do you think it would be helpful to orient ourselves towards politics, and also to calibrate the impact of policy on catalyzing some of the positive change that we want to see in the world, such that you've talked about now or in your book. Thank you.
That's a great question. I just want to run away from it though. But I won't. I will sit here in the fire and I will be with that question. The thing is, I think that this is a great question to come into from that last piece that we were touching on, that we are so deep in the damage. And it's like, I was explaining this to a friend the other day. It's like there's a teacup with 100 tea bags of confusion that have been steeping for 100 years. And we can't pull all that confusion apart from itself. All of that damage and confusion is really, it's nice to separate it on paper, but it won't be separated. It's impossible to separate it. So I've been struggling more in the past few weeks than I have in my entire life with the political questions. And I'm saying that because I am living in a country where it's not my culture, okay, and I actually cannot read the political cues. This has been a very interesting position to be in, because it's made me hyper aware of how these cues run so deep. So what looks at the surface like some sort of political meme or political positioning or platforming is much more, it's much more submerged than I thought. All right. And it's weird that this would come as a surprise to me, right? but the fact is, it's pretty significant. And so what I have had to really do is to look at the relationship between politics and then also culture, and then looking at those through generations, and then coming up with another question. All right, so the seduction is to look at the political framing and to respond or react to what you see there. But that framing is deep steeped in a lot of other stuff. And when you start to go around and under and into those interdependencies, what you come up with is a very different set of questions and responses. So it's interesting to me in the viral question where it is that this notion of my health being mine came from, and how this has been. I mean, my mom used to talk about how when she was raising my big brother, she was really taught not to coddle him, that in order to make him be able to survive in this culture, he needed to be independent. He needed to be emotionally independent. Let him cry. He needs to learn how to be independent. Don't help him with his homework. He's got to hit the wall himself. Right? He runs out of money. Don't bail him out. He'll just come back for more. Right? And that there's been a lot of communication across the generations, through the generations, about how valuable this independence is. In you know, even my mom, who's 91, she lives in an apartment building for older people because she doesn't want to be a burden. Right? So when I start to look at what the hell is happening in the political world around the virus, and then I look at some of those pieces of it, I come up with some very different questions, which is not, should it be the law to wear masks? Should we be in lockdown or not lockdown? It turns out those are the wrong questions, actually. There's a completely different order of questions, which has to do with how do we actually heal this relationship and begin to pour love and care across generations, to rekindle, to wake up, to bring the blood back to that interdependency. So that when I go in the store, that person next to me doesn't see me as just another unit, that I am actually a person who could be connected to someone who's immune deprived, or who's in, you know, they don't know, maybe I'm a healthcare worker, maybe I live with somebody who's sick. But it isn't about, hey, I'm young, I'm not going to get this, it doesn't matter, I'm cool. I don't want to be controlled, right? I don't want to be controlled either. And so then there's this other set of political questions that have to do with authority and militaristic control and where technology's going. And again, what's under there? How might we ask the better question instead of just responding to that as a you know, kind of sci-fi theme? And for me, that question has to do more with where is it that technology has no place? And who are the people in the technology world that I can have that conversation with, that we can begin to open that space with? I got nothing against technology, but there's some places it shouldn't be. And so it's great that technology can do anything. I don't want it to do everything. So where's that space? So does that help? So I'm in that political discussion, but I'm trying not to fall asleep at the wheel and just get caught in the impulse to make a direct response to something that is actually completely brewed in an interdependency of all kinds of broken systems. So it's not that it's pointless because it's all broken anyway. It's that in order to respond with any kind of do you know about double binds? So a double bind is a great theory. One of my dad's theories. A double bind is when you get caught in two contexts at the same time. And you can't do something and you can't not do something and you can't talk about it. So you might have that experience of, that partner who tells you, you never tell me that you love me. And if in that moment you say, oh, but I do love you. Nah, you're just saying that. So you can't really get the credit for saying it. And if you don't say it, then they're right. And if you say, yeah, but this is a trick, you're tricking me, then this is really not the moment for that comment. In the same way, so much of what's happening in the political sphere is a double bind. We need to address the ecological issues, okay? But to address the ecological issues is going to make it so that a lot of people don't have jobs. So we have to supply jobs. But if we supply jobs and keep the economy going, it ruins the ecology. Either way you turn, we're in a double bind. So one of the things that you can do in a double bind is to bring in another context. So instead of doing that thing where you have a complex problem and you start to simplify, remember we got taught, please simplify? Don't do that. Do the opposite thing. Bring in more complexity. And then you start to find the overlaps. You start to find the places where the contexts make something like a moire pattern over each other. And new, unprecedented possibilities come bubbling up. So you're with that partner, you can't say, you can't say, I do love you, and you can't not say it. But you might say, I grew up in a house where there wasn't a lot of affection. Okay, boom, you're going to another context. It's not about you or them, or right? You take it to another context, and that context begins to inform the others. And so this is what I was saying earlier when I was saying that these things slip out of the context you try to deal with them in. Complexity in living complex systems, that's always happening. That was too long, but I hope it was helpful.
Thank you so much. That was really thought-provoking, and thanks for the relationship advice too on top of that.
It's all the same thing.
Oh, yes. Okay. Lorraine, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
I thank you, Nora. I'm so over the top excited to be able to talk with you, and so grateful and honored to be able to ask this question. So I've been actually looking a lot at change and innovation in nature. Just for a little bit of context for you, I work as a systemic designer, which feels a bit like an oxymoron, but it's a really challenging thing. And so I'm trying to understand change and innovation in nature. And I know that caterpillars have cells in them that are called imaginal cells that are activated by the caterpillar kind of digesting itself, literally. And that those cells already have all of the potential of those butterfly parts in them. And I'm wondering, like, as a designer, should I just step back and not try to provoke the change? Like, is this our time for dormancy where we should just wait for what is to come out? Like, is it already in us and maybe we're just so not capable of sitting with it that we want to make it happen? This is my question. Like, is this just the right time and maybe it'll just emerge?
You know, this is a really beautiful question because it's so tempting, right? To dive into these kind of questions around, but what's the action? What's the practicality? What's the doing? How do we do this? What's the doing? And especially when lives are at stake and ecosystems are at stake. It's this question around action, which you may not think this is what you were asking about, but it's really important. And one of the things that I finally have come to just admit is that actually perception is action. It is. And if, depending on what is perceived, the horizon of potential actions and responses is revealed. Right? So in the example of the Monday night courses on education, that was purely imaginal cell material. Right? I thought that I was going to do this thing. I'm going to do this thing. And before I knew it, it was something else entirely. And I attribute that completely, that radical change was something that was in my life the whole time. And if I had said, oh, the answer's within, and all I have to do is just get still until I see it, I don't think I would have found it. For real. So it wasn't about being still, although being still is beautiful. It was about a particular set of conditions that allowed that thing to wake up. And I didn't know what those conditions were. I could not have predicted what those conditions were. But having found myself in the middle of them, I didn't resist. So I could have come in with a script and thought, this is what I'm going to do on the first day. This is what I'm going to do on the second day. I got about 30 seconds into the first one and we were like, woohoo, off the whole roadmap. And so I think it's that the preparation, right, of what it is to respond to complexity is really what we're doing, right? It's really about that, you know, like I was saying, this just watching this habit of needing to take what I find, you know, so triggering in whatever political rhetoric comes up and just, and you just want to bite it and tear it and burn it, right? And then going, wait a second, that's not the thing. That's just the pimple on the end of the nose of the thing. And so, you know, beginning that, but that's a perception. That's a perception shift. And that's where the action is. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I definitely don't think it's time for us to be thinking about what is post-corona life going to be like. Having said that, we absolutely have to consider what is post-corona life going to be like. So what's the difference between those two things? One of them is a rather flat set of linear trajectories. The other one could be a really rich dimension of detail. Right? If we were to look around this Zoom space right here, and I were to ask you, how did each of you end up here? Right? There is a bazillion, you know, someone you sat next to on a bus was reading a book when you were in 8th grade, and then, right, you met this person once and then you had this teacher, and then you got lost and you had a breakdown, and then you got sick, and, you know, like what are all the stories that are here that brought each of you to this room? There is no flat linear trajectory into that future space. So it's about It's about holding and tending the relationships that grow to become the conditions where those perceptions can shift. But that's how I would do it. That's my, I mean, other people have other modalities. There's probably room for lots of different ways. But that's more my style.
Thank you so much. That was lovely.
And Nora, so I think that this would be a beautiful way to kind of finish out. Prad, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Nora. Lovely to see you in person. I love your book, The Smaller Arcs. Beautiful book. And I also enjoy how you speak about the different problems. You have a way of speaking in a rich, contextual, circular, but with some sense of meaning being transmitted. It's not flat. So I can see why if someone reads a transcript of this conversation, they would lose out on what is the essence that's being conveyed. Which brings me to the point that how do we decide what is the right question to ask? And you illustrated some of that in one of the questions that was asked to you, where you went through that process of switching between and saying, is this even the right question to consider? And then you did some let's call it magic. I would love to listen to your thinking process around what are the principles that help you reframe your question. What is the right question? Because like you said, if it's a wrong question, we are just stuck in the wrong action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's this great Einstein quote, right? About if he had an hour to answer a question and his life depended on it, he would spend, to figure out a problem, right? He would spend the first 55 minutes coming up with the question. Because then once he had the question, then he could actually deal with it pretty quickly. Okay, so there are a lot of different contexts that come into play in any particular complex predicament or issue. Okay, lots of different contexts are there. You know, we can look at this virus as a medical problem. We could look at it as an intergenerational question. We could look at it as an economic question. We can look at it through the lens of the ecology and the climate. We can look at it through the lens of culture and media and technology, right? All of those are different contexts. So I guess what I always try to do is to bring in that transcontextual approach. But let me be really clear here, because that could appear at first that I would make a little list. Okay, media, technology, yada, yada, yada. Politics, this. Intergenerations, that. Okay, but that is not what I do. What I am interested in is the way in which these things are in relationship to each other, how they melt into each other. So I'm looking for the melty places. So the idea of making nice, clean lists of all the systemics to understand the system, I find highly unuseful. It gives you at least some notion that there's multiple contexts, but it doesn't tell you anything about the melty, difficult relational processes between them, which is really where the possibility is. It's really where the stuckness is. It's where the damage is. It's where the healing is. It's where the learning is, that mutual learning. It's, you know, I think Raven was talking about the liminal space. Okay, this is that liminal realm. And so I guess I can only say that I just go swimming in that melty, intersteeping, transcontextual, warm data space until I find that I'm holding a question. And I don't know how to say, except for that, you know, when you know. You know, I mean, I'm sorry, but that's as clear as I can be. And then again, there is a lot of rigor there. So this is not a non-rigorous issue here. The whole process of the warm data labs and all that work in warm data is really about exactly your question. I think you would love that, actually. Yeah, so because that's what it is. And more often than not, what you find is that it's going to, whatever the it thing is, it's going to link into something very, very intimate. And it will also link into something very big. So it's that simultaneous zoom in and zoom out, but it's never flat. It's that deep, rich detail of, you know, that feed the babies question. That is a really personal, the most personal, intimate relationship. And the question is always, for me, it always is about, how do I bring, where is there vitality here? Is in these relational processes that I'm looking at, where is the vitality? What's making vitality and what's devitalizing? And sometimes that's not a binary. Very often that's a paradox. Maybe most of the time. And then you're in that double blind place and around we go. And it's like, I just kind of have to tumble in it, but again, it's a lot of rigor. And all I can tell you is that the kind of questions you come out with are never the ones you thought you were looking for. So that really helps. If you think you're working on an ecological project and that your questions have to do with ecology and climate change, and you come out with questions that are about ecology and climate change, go back. When you start to come out with questions that have to do with, I don't know, I mean, you know, sexuality, feeding babies, making art, then you're probably right, because you're probably, at that point, you're probably working with multiple contextual processes simultaneously. That's probably more on it. But there's a user warning here, which is that once you have one of those questions, no one will understand what the hell you're talking about ever again. So it won't fit on the KPI. You'll never get a grant for it. It's just that it's just that you'll be in good company.
Beautiful, thank you. That was a beautiful poetic response with rigor. Appreciate it.
It's a great question.
Wonderful. And we find ourselves at the top of the hour. Nora, thank you so much for joining us today and answering all these unasked questions. We're just like finding questions everywhere we look, it seems.
I know, there's so many that we didn't touch.
I know. Yes, well, we would love to have you again here at the STOA. And I also would like to invite everybody here, and yourself included, to come back. And I think we'll maybe take like a 5-minute break and then do the sense-making session, which will be more just like open dialogue. But do you have any final words that you would like to use to close this experience?
Yeah, I do. I do. I just want to tend for a moment that space of cynicism. And I don't mean the good kind of cynicism, I mean the other kind. Because it's very difficult right now to not be carrying that. And you know, I definitely have bouts of falling under the tide, of feeling like, oh my God, the change makers are out of their minds. They just want to change people. That's crazy. Oh my God, the politicians, they're just, it's out of control. Everyone's insane. Oh my God, the grant people are useless. They can't give a grant to anything that has anything to do with anything real. Oh my God, the teachers and the education system, the health system, right? And then there's Monty Python. And then there's a little bit of art. And then there's some, you know, interaction with my puppy or my kids or with you, and someone asks a question. There's some something there. And I guess what I really want to end with today is an invitation to invite others to live in a world that's beautiful. I think it's so important right now. You see how important I think it is? It's that important. That's how we feed the babies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. And speaking of invitations, I would like to invite everyone to the STOA sessions that we have coming up today. So Nora, while I tell people about what fun things we're up to today, could you share the link to your Monday night sessions in the group chat?
Okay, yeah. Just, I'm not great with this, so just be patient. I'll get it in there in a minute, okay?
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so what we have going on today, we have like a very, very busy day. Later on at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, we have Relational Exegesis, the Guru Papers with Freya, and that is it's an event where we're going to be reading together. We're going to be reading out loud and writing notes and processing this piece of work called the Guru Papers. So you don't have to come prepared, and I think it'll be a really fun kind of experience and working with different types of texts and processes. So that's a fun thing we'll be doing later on today. We also have Radical Honesty During a Pandemic with Brad Blanton, and that's at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And Concept Unfolding with Nicholas Benjamin. And I think Nicholas might actually be here. And if he is, I would like to invite him to unmute himself and tell us about his event. And maybe he's not, actually, I'm not sure. I'm looking. Actually, I don't think he is. Well, he has a fun kind of sense-making activity event that's happening today. So that's that. And of course, you can check out all of our events at thestoa.ca. Put that in the chat for you. And we see the STOA as a gift to everyone while we are navigating this complex liminal space. And if you feel inspired to give a gift to us, you can visit us at the gift economy at thestoa.ca. So, and with that, I thank you all.
Okay, there we go.
Great, the link.